Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Alexi.
Yeah, long time no see.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we had an amazing webinar thanks to you a couple of weeks ago, which attracted quite a lot of attention. And we had a lot of questions that we didn't answer, 12 questions. And I thought it would be pity just to throw away these questions. And I thought we should do a follow-up and record all the answers. Yeah, so thanks for agreeing to that. And I also want to release this as a podcast episode without video, just audio only. And for those who didn't listen to your workshop, to your webinar about getting a data engineering job, maybe can you give like a short summary of what you talked about there?
Yeah, so I mean, the main point is that, people really want to hire data engineers. If you look at, the statistics or even, Slack channels or LinkedIn, you'll see lots of opportunities for data engineering jobs. So then, the reason why it's still challenging to get a data engineering job is you need to really convince employers that you'll have the skills that will enable you to start contributing. And if you think about what those skills are, it's essentially back-end engineering, cloud computing, and data pipelines. Um, and so, like with back-end engineering, that means Python and SQL. With cloud computing, that's Docker, a cloud service like AWS, Bash. And then data pipelines is like Airflow, Snowflake, or Redshift for our data warehouse and DBT. Um, and the main, you'll see lots of people kind of build projects that check these things off, post them on Reddit or something like that. But the main thing that I see when I look at these projects is that there's just not a lot of Python and SQL. And those are really the two main skill sets that students should be focusing on. And really that your project should display. So like lots of times I won't see like 50 lines of Python and SQL, let alone there really should be, like I said, kind of like over a few hundred of Python and a few hundred of SQL. And then you want to, write cleaner code. So that means, small functions like 5 lines or fewer in Python, use object-oriented programming, 100 lines or fewer for each class, have your names like be well named, kind of descriptive naming, and write some tests just to show that this is, kind of a professional level project. And then one idea I said for kind of really showcasing those skills in addition to your own project is work on open source projects because this really enforces quality of code, right? For people to accept your pull requests, it means that your code needs to be readable. Less times it needs to be tested, right? And these are pretty close to professional level projects. Some of them really are professional level, meaning that they're built by and maintained by professional teams. And also you'll be exposed to and will be forced to use like a full tech stack, like CI/CD, Docker, Python and SQL, how they integrate. And a good resource for finding these is Code for America has a number of different chapters, and they are have like remote meetups that you can join and make contributions. So that's really like in terms of getting the skills, and that was essentially like the first half of the talk. Um, then the second half of the talk is the application process. And one thing this is, I think the way to think about this is like a funnel, right? You have the bottom of the funnel, which is essentially, sending in the application or getting views on your LinkedIn. The middle of the funnel, which is kind of like the behavioral interview. And then you have the top of the funnel. Maybe I just put that in reverse, but you have the last part of the funnel, which is the technical interview and then the final round interviews. And the easiest thing I think for anyone to do at the bottom of the funnel is just like improve their LinkedIn profile, have relevant skills listed, have as many of them as possible, meaning like you can have like 20, 30, 40 skills listed. Definitely have a picture, have the about section relevant to data engineering. And from there, when you apply on LinkedIn or other things, they'll look at your LinkedIn, and I think you'll get a lot you'll get a lot more interviews that way. And then resume, just recraft it for a data engineering job. Make sure it's relevant skills, that even if you didn't have past engineering experiences, that you highlight skills that really translate into tech. And you can show this maybe to somebody that works in a technical role, like an engineering role, and talk to them about your past experiences. That way that you're able to highlight them. And then, so that's the bottom of the funnel. And then the next step is the behavioral interview. And this too, I recommend, speaking with a peer, someone that you trust, someone that you're close to, and that you'll take real feedback from, and kind of give them like this criteria. One is that, you're a positive professional. And that means like the easiest thing is that you'll speak positively about all past experiences. And lots of times this is something that people fail on. People, even after you tell them, they still fail on this. And it can, in many jobs, just be an instant disqualifier. People really want to make sure that you're easy to work with. And so this is just something you have to do. And then the second thing is, speaking clearly. By that, I mean, you should talk in a way that's kind of like an outline when you're explaining things. So, you can think of like a heading and then bullet points. So one kind of classic book related, again, it's like that heading and then different bullet points. It looks like a pyramid. Another way to think about this is problem solution. In my last job, we had this issue where, we had a great product, but it wasn't marketed properly, or maybe we really marketed well in one city, but we needed to expand. So my role was to figure out what we were doing here and then replicate it across 30 different cities, right? Mention the problem, then go to the solution. And then finally, answers first, right? If you think that someone has a question in mind, or they explicitly ask a question, give them the answer, right? Like that should be your top line reply, is the answer. And then you can always go into more details about it. So this just ensures that you're an effective communicator, which is really essential as an engineer. So then the last thing in the behavioral interview, right, we did speak positive, speak clearly. The third thing is just show that you're interested in the position, that you're really passionate and motivated to work in that role. And then the key kind of story to tell that you should feel and own walking into the interview is, okay, given my past experiences and what I want to do in the future, this role is like the perfect next step for me, right? So those are kind of three things to think through and do in the behavioral interview. And like I said, I think it really benefits to do a mock interview or two with somebody that you're close with. It could be really anyone, but ask them to evaluate you on this criteria. And then finally, so you get through the behavioral interview, then is like the technical interview. And then the easiest way to sum this up is generally it's a LeetCode SQL problem that's medium to hard, a Python LeetCode problem that's beginner level. And then you can also see a take-home project sometimes. I'd say in about a third of the like interview rounds, which is, they'll give you some raw data, like a CSV file. They're asking you to load into a database, query the data, show some kind of findings from the data, and then present the findings either, with like Matplotlib or data visualization library, or just simply PowerPoint. And then, from there, I say like the last step round is kind of a crapshoot, like the final round interview. Just again, speak clearly, show that you're motivated. Lots of times it is primarily behavioral, and that just they want to see an understanding of the tech stack.
That's a good summary, but of course we missed a lot of details. So check it out. I will include the link to the actual video, to the actual webinar. It's quite long. It's packed with useful information. I think it's like the part where you present something is like 45 minutes or 40 minutes. Yeah, quite extensive, quite detailed. So check it out. And yeah, maybe I'll just do a quick summary of your summary. So you said like
Sure.
focus on four areas. So Python SQL, Cloud, Docker, then Airflow and data warehouses like Snowflake, Redshift. Then build a project that checks all these things off, but don't just do that. Focus on Python and SQL, right? So your project should have a lot of Python and SQL, not a lot of other things, right? So you
Exactly.
want to show people that you really know how to use these things. And then you need to write clean code, follow object-oriented design, and so on. And this is how you build a good portfolio. Then you can take part in open source project and so on to build this portfolio. And then you need to start applying, right? And the application process is like you mentioned a few things, you need to send out applications, you need to get a lot of views on your content on LinkedIn, and then in behavioral interview, you need to show that you're a positive professional, you speak positively about things, you speak clearly, show that you're interested in. And then for technical interviews, you get LeetCode SQL problems, you get LeetCode Python problems, and then the last thing was you get a take-home assignment, which could be like building a small project, right? And then there are some stuff in addition to that, right? Is it a good
Yeah,
summary?
exactly. I mean, there could be, I mean, lots of times you'll get, questions about, lots of times they're database related questions, just like what's a view, what's a materialized view, or what's the difference between OLTP versus OLAP, things like that.
And now that we gave all the context for those who haven't watched the webinar, please do watch if you haven't, but I think we provided enough context. And now I wanted to actually continue with the questions that this is where we uh, stopped last time. And yeah, we still have quite a lot of questions. And I wanted to start with the first one. So the first question that we didn't answer from the previous session was, if you could go back in time, how would you learn about Python and SQL from scratch?
Yeah, so I'd say, I mean, the hardest thing is getting started with a first programming language, in my opinion. I mean, I started with Ruby, but I found that very challenging to really understand those first few steps. I wrote intro to Python curriculum that I do really recommend. It's on jigsawlabs.io. So I battle tested this, as kind of I mentioned in some earlier podcast, by teaching my mom and giving the material to my mom. And trust me, it was not uh, eligible for my mom to learn it. The first time I did that, she kind of gave me lots of, okay, just get to the point again and again. I do think that it's really beginner friendly. And there's no kind of installation or even sign in. You just click on it. But I recommend it. I know I'm biased, obviously. For the SQL stuff, what are a first step? It takes you through the fundamentals, and then from there, what I recommend people do. There's two books I really think are good. One is called Think Python by Alan Downey. It's a short book. You can kind of like read it on the train or things like that, and then I think he has some questions along with it. And then, of course, like Automate the Boring Stuff with Python is also quite good. In both of them, I'd say like
It's a
try to do
course,
the
right? Or
challenges.
it's also a book? Because I know that there is a
Both
course
of them
about.
are books online. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I know I think there's like a Udemy course as well on the
Yeah, yeah,
automate the
exactly.
boring stuff. Um, but yeah, both of them are good. And then another resource I should mention for just backend engineering in general is like Miguel Grinberg, like build a Flask application, something along those lines. That's a nice project if you want to get an overview of essentially backend engineering. And then for SQL, Khan Academy is excellent. Like they have, both their interface is really good where you can start typing and it tells you when you're making a mistake, and it shows you really like in an interactive console the results, and it's really a nice interface. And it goes into pretty strong SQL concepts. So I would start there, and then after that, I think Mode, the dashboarding company, they have some really nice lessons and tutorials on SQL as well.
Okay. We will need all these links from you, and I will include them
Okay,
in the description,
sure.
definitely.
Mhm.
I didn't know about a couple of things from here. So thanks a lot for the recommendations. So another question from Ilya is, if I already work in BI and mostly use SQL and no-code tools, should I get the most from my current role to have higher start in data engineering, or change without waiting?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing to note is it's going to take time. Even if you land the first role, it's probably still going to take a month, 6 weeks to actually transition into move through the interview process and switch the role. So I would say start trying to make your job more technical. Take on those projects. That's the easiest thing you can do in that work. Then you'll still need to supplement with Python. The other if you want a data engineering role, the other alternative is maybe if you don't have Python experience, to look for analytics engineering roles, which generally don't require Python, or at least too much Python.
But it can be both, right? So you can try to look for a job and try to make your work more technical. One
Yeah,
doesn't
exactly.
exclude the other. Although, yeah, it can be a bit tricky to, find a job and then try to learn new things at work at the same time, but that should be manageable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you just want to be I think they'll figure out what you know and what you don't know, so they'll have an idea as to how much they're willing to, they think they're comfortable ramping you up in new skills.
Yeah, actually, like if you think about the job descriptions, this is always worth keeping in mind that the job description describes the ideal candidate. This candidate usually does not exist. And
Exactly.
if you do not tick off the boxes, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply. Like if it's 60% or 50%, you can apply. And then, yeah, you shouldn't
Yeah,
reject yourself before they reject you. So let them
exactly.
do this, right? So you just apply and then let them worry about you being a good fit or not.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of it, just to reinforce that, like when I think back to hiring candidates, if everyone who applied to the job actually had all the skills we listed, right, or we would have filled the job in an hour. But instead, it takes weeks and weeks because when we ultimately make a hire, it's generally that hire rarely has all the skills, and we're totally comfortable with that.
Okay. Another question. I have almost 10 years of working experience, but non-coding related. Does that negatively impact the career path? And how do I decide between data analytics or engineering? I guess this is the second question, so let's start with the first part.
With the first one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you would just start as a junior engineer essentially, right? As an associate or junior engineer, but otherwise it doesn't negatively impact the career path, unless as long as you adapt to kind of like the skills that are needed. So that's sometimes what we see is maybe people that come from a corporate background. They're a little bit concerned about asking questions or things like that. They just need to adapt to kind of more of a startup engineering culture. But as long as you do that, that's totally fine. I don't think it has a negative impact. And a lot of the students that I've taught have had 10, 20 years experience in something else.
Mhm. And on the contrary, it can have positive impact, right? If you're, let's say, you're a lawyer, or I don't know, like in your case, you were a lawyer, right? But you can be, I don't know, bookkeeper or whatever. And if you, let's say, apply to a company where your domain expertise will be very valuable, then all of a sudden you're ahead of other candidates just because of this domain expertise. So maybe for your first jump, it would be, if it's possible, of course, you should try to find for areas where your domain expertise, your previous experience will put you ahead of other people.
Right. And then just to reinforce that, I mean, really, also skill set, like one thing that people don't expect, but is kind of true, is lots of times musicians make very good engineers because they're very detail oriented. They get into the work, they focus on, little steps to make it better. And it's a real craft, right? Which so is engineering. And so like a lot of former students that I taught were musicians and are exceptional engineers, and a lot of hiring managers have had that experience as well.
Was it something you said in the webinar that if you're good at one thing, it's likely that you could be good in other things? So do
Mm-hmm.
mention this in the CVs, right?
Yeah, exactly. This was something the CEO of my old company told me, because one of our students, he was like an NCAA basketball player. I think he was on like the championship team, and he was getting tons of interviews. And the CEO was like, "Yeah, I'm not surprised. Like he just said he's like winners are winners. And we always want to hire winners. So that's the way he put it. So if you're really strong in something, we have a good amount of those students as well. I mean, it just shows like dedication, passion, detail oriented, self-learning, like all those skills translate.
And coming back to the second part of the question, how to decide between data analyst or engineering?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say there's a couple ways to think through it. Data analyst can, depending on the role, can be a little bit more entry level, right? Like, because it doesn't always require technical skills. It's also a little bit more in the vein of actually doing analytics, meaning using data to make decisions or inform decisions, right? And then data engineering is oftentimes more it is the engineering skill set, meaning SQL, Python. The reason why I kind of hesitate is also because data analyst is a pretty fluid definition. You'll see, some descriptions that really require zero coding, and some descriptions that essentially look like a data engineering role, and then some descriptions that essentially look like a data science role. So it really depends on, okay, what that term means. But in general, like in terms of subject matter wise, analyst is more extracting insights from data. And the engineering is, right, the Python and SQL and cloud computing to collect and organize that data.
And perhaps the data analytics role is where your previous 10 years of experience can be a bigger advantage, where while in data engineering maybe, because data engineers, they don't tend to work closely with domain experts with and all this how to say, like they're maybe data analysts, they're a lot closer to product, to the end users, right? So where having the domain expertise, all this experience is more important.
Right.
Okay, another question. I am just in first year of IT job in data integration, monitoring pipelines, and solving data quality issues. I have Python 3 certificate, IBM data engineering certificate. Am I eligible to switch to data engineering role as a junior or senior? And this part is confusing. Switch to data engineer role as junior, or should I opt for postgrad in big data engineering? So basically, I guess the question asks, am I ready to work, or I need to keep learning?
I mean, it's really like, do you have the skills kind of mentioned, right? Like, do you have Python and SQL skills? That's the main thing. Like, could you contribute to an open source project if you saw kind of like an ETL project, online, right? That looks like a code base. Can you actually make contributions to that? So do you know Git and GitHub? So really, it's all about the skill sets. And that's it. It goes back to that question. Okay, we want data engineers. Well, like we want. So if we hired you, could you start contributing and helping us organize and clean our data?
And again, it doesn't mean that if you go for a postgraduate degree in big data or data engineering, you will automatically learn these skills.
I
Maybe you will
would totally
spend
agree with that.
2 years learning interesting stuff, but then
Yes.
after these 2 years, now with advanced degree, like with a master's degree, you could be back to square one without,
Mm-hmm.
and you still might not have the experience you actually need for the job. And in some
Right.
cases, you just need to do it, to learn how to do this.
Yeah. One thing to kind of highlight about that is, I mean, when evaluating these programs, one thing to ask is, okay, what percentage of the students graduate from the program? And then of those graduates, what percentage get jobs, right? And then you multiply those two numbers together to see, your probability of getting a job after the program. So if 60% of the students graduate and then 60% of the students of those get jobs, right? That's really a low percentage. It's 36%, right? Of students that enroll in the course, ultimately get hired, and you want to see, okay, like what are those jobs in, how long does it take to get those jobs, right? That will kind of show you the success rate of enrolling in the program.
Hmm. Yeah. But yeah, also maybe like it shouldn't completely discourage you. It's just, this is statistics, but if you're motivated. But then again, like, do you really want to spend, I don't know, 2 years getting a master's degree? Because like masters, it's more, in my experience, they usually focus more on research rather than applied stuff. Like if you want to learn applied stuff, I'm not sure master's degree is what you need.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I see is sometimes the courses don't aren't really integrated, meaning that sometimes they'll teach the same topic again and again.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes they'll, like if you do data science, sometimes they'll teach regression so many different times through the course, but when they could be, just ensuring that students learn it and then move on to other topics. And then sometimes the courses don't always like line up. For instance, some courses may teach Python, and then some courses might, okay, then go into like Weka or R or something like that, which doesn't really reinforce the first skill. So that's what I see sometimes with master's courses is they have individual teachers developing each course, and they don't really mesh too well.
It might sound like we're trying to convince you not to do masters, while it's partially true. I think I was trying to some extent, but on the other hand, it also depends on what you want. Because, for example, the masters I took, people who I studied with, they were the people behind Apache Flink, so they actually learned like all these fundamentals, like a lot of hardcore stuff, to be able
Mm.
to work on Apache Flink, right? So this is not something you can of course learn this at work, but yeah, some areas they are quite researchy. Like if you want to come up with a new way of doing stream processing, right? So then you probably need to have this research foundation. But if all you want is just work as a usual data engineer at a internet company, or maybe not necessarily internet company, yeah, maybe you can take a shortcut.
Yeah, one thing I should mention too that I saw as a career path is that some students will first land the job, as an engineer, and then after a year or two, they'll take a master's degree
Yeah.
course, like online or something like that. I guess because they think, and I think it can be really useful to their skills if they feel like, okay, I want to at this point go deeper into like algorithms, or maybe it's just something I feel like I need on my resume in order to progress. And there may, depending, or maybe the company will pay for it, right? So I think it could be useful like after you're kind of more informed and you're around people that are really informed, uh, to then get a master's degree.
Exactly. Okay, moving on to the next one. So what do you think about fully remote, i.e. work from anywhere, data engineering job opportunities? I found many remote, but all of them are based in the same
Mm.
country. I also saw them remote and then in parentheses US only, for example, or
Right.
EU only. So what do you think about this? Like, have you come across such positions?
Yeah, I tend to see the same thing, say like US, Canada, or it'll be kind of time zone, say willing to work in this time zone. Um, yeah, so I guess the question is, how do you get jobs from a different country? And I do think that's challenging. One thing may be at that point, it feels like the bar would be even higher for like you'd have to be it might be even harder for you to get the position, meaning, okay, just be a standout candidate would be like my recommendation. And a way, I think like the theme of kind of what I keep saying is just like, okay, to get the job, just do the job. Like do the job before you get the job, right? And show that. So that could be again, like that's why I keep saying like open source, but it could be any kind of real project to show, okay, I'm already doing this. Like I'll be able to contribute. There's really no risk with me, and that's great if you can eliminate the company's risk. Then I think they'd love to hire you.
And I did come across some companies who work fully, like who hire fully remotely. There are fewer of them compared to those who hire in specific geographic locations. Um, but I think there is a reason. Like, for example, if a company has a legal entity in the US, maybe they don't want to deal with all the paperwork that come with hiring
Right.
people from, let's say, from Europe and vice versa. But some people, some companies, they're willing to invest, so they believe in fully remote work from anywhere, and these are the companies you need to try to look for. They are harder to find, but they do exist. And I guess to find them, you need to do what Jeff said. Okay, moving on. Should teaching or coaching on data science related classes uh, be included in your CV in the related in the past experience section?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like that's definitely relevant. Like it involves, coding skills, involves analytical thinking, it involves communication. So all those things are great to highlight, and it involves kind of ownership of a project. So yeah, absolutely.
Mhm. And I think to me, teaching is it shows me that the person can, well, as you said, it's communication, right? So person can not just learn something, but also pass on this knowledge. And in teamwork, this is a very important skill, especially if you talk about like senior roles, where it's expected from senior people to coach and teach more junior team members. Right? So this is very helpful, and it also, like to me, if you can teach something, it means that you also learn quite well, because in order to teach you need to know the thing quite well, right? So like there are only pluses. I cannot think of negative
Yeah.
sides here.
I agree. And I'm just thinking of all the kind of teachers that I've worked with in the past, and a lot of them have moved on to from teaching, and they immediately got hired in like amazing engineering roles, like Netflix or Facebook, Microsoft, like basically name your company. But like another reason why they're so successful is it's mastery of the fundamentals, right? That's what you're teaching lots of times, and that's like essential in interviews and on the job.
Yeah, and if you taught a course about some basics of, I don't know, Python, then probably answering a question on the interview that asks about some stuff you were teaching shouldn't be too difficult, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if they go outside of what you are teaching, that might be trickier. But at least if like you were doing a course, you were teaching a course about something, then it also like gives you an advantage. Anyways, moving on. Is object-oriented programming a must for data engineering roles, or well, what do you think?
I think that you should know it. Can you find data engineering roles that maybe don't require it? Probably. But in I think of like data engineering as basically being a software engineer that also knows cloud computing and data pipelines, and just a lot of the tools like Airflow, right, is in an object oriented way. Like it's using objects to create the DAGs and what workflows, whatever things like that. So yeah, like I think that you should know object oriented programming. And then as for Java, Scala, right? Java. So I've had some students that, we've never taught Java, but I've had some students that because they know object-oriented programming, then have been hired in Java roles. Scala is so I think that you can learn Java, but I would focus on most of the roles I see are still Python. So that's what I recommend. And then Scala, you'll see that as well. Like that does come up, and that's more different, right? Than Python. It's more functional. Um, and I think more of a challenge probably to learn for beginners. So yeah, it would probably disqualify you from some jobs that are a bit more senior level. But if you're starting to learn to code, if you're starting to trying to get that first role, that's why I would focus on Python and ignore the jobs that are saying, all right, we want Java, we want Scala.
Or maybe not ignore, apply anyways and let
Yeah,
them reject you. Don't reject yourself. But
sure.
this is, I guess it also comes back to the discussion we had previously about Spark, like how important is it to know Spark? And the point you had was that you see Spark more often on uh, job positions, on job descriptions for more senior people. And I think this is the same jobs where you see Java and Scala, right? Because like
Hmm.
Spark is written in Java Scala, right? And it's natural that at some point you might also need to maybe write some of your Spark jobs, or maybe at that company they write everything in Scala. That also happen. Um, yeah. So I guess like when you're there, and if you already have some experience, maybe you used PySpark, then they can just hire you without Java, uh, just because you already have all the foundation. And then Scala, Java, they're different, but not so different that you cannot learn this on the job. A question from Christian. So, was it mentioned how many technical questions you are given in the interview, SQL, Python? I guess this is a question about the technical interviews where we were talking about all the SQL, sorry, LeetCode, SQL, LeetCode, Python kind of questions.
Yeah, I think you generally get like 5 to 8, maybe. They can, they're kind of like different style of questions, but um, yeah, that's generally what I see is maybe it could be either like a take home, in which case maybe they'll list, 5 to 8 questions that are Python SQL related, or it could be one of these, either in person or live coding, and it's the same type of thing. Or of course, it could also just be a timed. But again, I normally say like around 5 to 8.
Mhm. But I guess you mean like they're relatively small, right? Because I cannot imagine if somebody asks you to solve 8 LeetCode medium algorithmic
That's
challenges.
true. That would be a lot. Although, um, though, so then, but I think, yeah, I guess it would be more like 5. Oh, yeah, or some relatively small, a longer, more challenging thing would be 8, and maybe that's around a couple different
Mhm.
rounds. I mean, you do get these marathon interviews that are, 4
Mhm.
hours long or something like that.
I think the kind of questions I saw are you're given a database, and then the first question is, I don't know, to group by. The second question is
Mhm.
do group by, but having the with having the having clause, right? And then I don't know, another one is you still use the same database, right? You still write the same kind of queries, so you don't need to get into context every time. You you go, you get the next question. You kind of know the data already, and then it's just about maybe tweaking a bit the previous answer, adding the having clause or adding the order by clause, or I don't know, God forbid, these window functions that I have to Google every time I need to
Right.
use them. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say those are, I definitely would prefer those interviews. Sometimes you will see kind of essentially one of these like hacker ranked style quizzes, where you finish one problem and then you click and that gives you a different prompt. I find them pretty challenging because sometimes they're timed as well, and you have to just get used to the interface. But it's, that's what some companies are asking.
So I think we already talked a bit about the topic of certificates. So the question is a GCP data engineer certification valuable for getting your first data engineering job? So what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think that we're in agreement. It's the skill set, not the certificate. Maybe there will be some like recruiters that will be looking for that, and then you'll get into that first round. But again, ultimately, they're going to be, you're going to be talking to a hiring manager who wants to know, okay, do you know these topics, and can you code? And in my experience, kind of just haven't had too much difficulty getting to the interview, right? Like getting interviews for data engineering positions. So because of that, I would just focus on the skill sets.
So preparing for the certificate is useful if you prepare, like if you study the fundamentals, if you don't grind for the format of the certificate, right? Because you also, like when you take a quiz, like if you do these exams, you also
Mhm.
need to prepare for the format, which maybe is not super useful for the job you're doing, but the fundamental knowledge that you need to pick up when you prepare for these certificates. That might be useful.
Right. One thing also to
Not
say
might
is,
be, but will be. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, and I've used some of those certificate books, like to ramp up on different features of AWS, and some of them are really well written.
Okay, yeah, also like this thing in AWS, these roles, IAM roles, this is something that was blowing my mind all the time until I took a course, a part of the course that was also focusing on AWS certification, and I just took the part about the roles, and then
Right.
finally, I cannot say I got this completely, but then at least like now I have some order in my head, so it's not just chaotic mess. So yeah, they can be helpful. Another question or moral statement, like I find that open source contribution projects still fall short as they ask for commercial experience. They here, I think, refer to companies. So you have open source contributions, but companies still want to have commercial experience from you. So how do you compensate for that? How do you apply for a job that requires commercial experience when all you have is open source contributions?
Yeah, I mean, I would still apply, obviously. And like I said, I haven't found people having that much difficulty getting to the interview round. So I wonder if it is the way that it's spoken about. So that's kind of one thing is just, okay, are you choosing? I mean, some of these open source contributions, like if you're making contributions to Prefect or something like that, it's hard for me to think that people like kind of poo-poo that. And same thing if you're making contributions to real like almost like some of the like nonprofits that have really a team of engineers. Those you're essentially doing free work for the company at that point. So one thing maybe is if you're doing that for some nonprofits, you can potentially parlay that into like almost a little bit of an internship experience, right? Or say you ask to meet with the company or with an engineer once every couple of weeks. I think there are some companies that will do that, that will kind of mentor you at a certain point, which is pretty good. And then the other thing is, maybe there are some small roles or gigs, like kind of contractor type roles that at that point you can take on, do, and then add that to your resume. But I think that you should think through, and one thing I see a lot is people misdiagnosing where they're getting stuck. I think you should think through which part of the funnel you're getting stuck in. So if you're getting interviews, then you're probably hitting your resume is probably good enough, and meaning that's kind of the purpose of the resume is to get you to the interview in my experience. So then you want to think through, okay, am I communicating my skills well in the behavioral interview if they're just having like a quick conversation? Or you want to think, okay, is there something else I'm not doing in that behavioral interview? Maybe you're not being as positive as you could be, or showing that this is really the job for you, but they want to hire people that have the skills, right? As long as you are able to demonstrate that, there should be enough roles out there for you. There are going to be certainly some companies that say, no, we only want people, with 2 to 3 years experience. I get that. That happens every day that I reach out to companies. But also what happens is I reach out and don't claim my students have any experience, and people are happy to talk and interview them.
And also here the question is what actually qualifies as commercial experience? Is it when you get paid for what you do? Or is it when you work in a team, I don't know, with senior engineers and stakeholders and whatnot? And like probably you can have this the second one, still doing like this the data for social good kind of projects, and for getting paid. I don't know. I don't think companies really care if you were paid or not. Like all they care is if you can solve the problems. So I guess you need to demonstrate that in the behavioral interviews, right? Okay, I'm currently 40 and work in sales. How can I convince recruiters to give me a chance to pursue a career change? I'm currently pursuing a computer science degree.
Yeah, I think that, like I would just say the same thing. Like I've had a lot of students that are 40 plus, and then move in. Like I have a student currently who's 40 plus, and he gets plenty of interviews. The one, so I'm trying to think of more when it would be an issue because which I can think of some scenarios because in general I don't find that to be a barrier, especially if you have a good amount of people would see that as an asset, right? Like lots of times people want to hire adults. It's great to have someone who will show up for work, do their job, right, and be a great professional on their team. When it can be an issue is just more, if a startup is looking to hire like a 28-year-old who's going to be working like 70 hours a week, something like that. And that's just simply not a good fit for you at this point in your life. And you know it and they know it. And so, that happens too. But like I said, there's generally enough roles. I think that you should probably, talk and see where you are kind of getting stuck in the interview process if that's happening, but in my experience really won't be an issue. It is something I'm asked a lot about when students enroll in a course or something like that, but when they actually go on interviews and start the application process, last times they're some of the first people to get hired, at least my last couple of students that fit that demographic.
And also, thinking about sales, I know what salespeople need to do, and they're very good communicators, right? And you should use these skills because many of the tech people do not have them. So engineers are usually pretty bad at convincing people, persuasion, like all these things that salespeople know how to do really well, because as a salesperson, you need to know how to sell. Right? And here you need to sell yourself, right? And then you've been doing this for, I guess, quite some time, right? So you need to know how to package your skills to sell yourself. And I think you're quite in a good position for doing this. So I think this area, maybe it's not super technical, but you can use the skills for your advantage. And think
Yeah,
of
one
ways.
other thing is, it's like finding solutions for problems. All right, you're finding solutions for the customer given a problem. So we have students that were solutions engineers, and a lot of that involves sales, and that's a good background because it's understanding the client needs, seeing and understanding the issue, and then recommending or seeing how the product can fit into that. And I mean that's a big part of engineering as well, as choosing the right product, understanding the issue, and taking the right steps forward.
Yeah, I think I saw this solution engineer or solution architect, right? These kind of roles. So,
Exactly.
it's like pre-sales or post-sales, could be both, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. It's they sometimes they know a lot about the product and they're able to understand the client needs and then work with them to get onboarded and provide ongoing support.
Yeah, so maybe you're not working on the core part of the tool, but you know how to use the tool very well to sell it to the client. Yeah, that's actually a good thing to try. Okay, I think that is the last question. Amazing. So we covered all of these questions. It took a bit longer than I anticipated, but yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you, Jeff, for being available, for taking some time to finish this. It took, I don't know, like that, like we had quite a few questions because it took like, I don't know, 40, 50 minutes to finish all of them. So yeah, thanks again, and please send me the links. We will include all of them in the description. And I'm looking forward to talking to you again.
Sounds great. Anytime.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
All right. Thanks, Alexi. Bye.